close, I can't see that far. What's up? That wasn't a lot of people. What's up? Ah! Tell me about it, bro. I'm feeling it. All right. How are we feeling? Good, bad?
Thank you.
All right, we have a ton of opportunities for y'all to serve here at Grable on Sunday mornings. If you ever want to help out, talk to one of your leaders or Michael. That should probably be the first thing. That should be the first thing you do if you want to do that. What should be the first thing?
Talk to somebody.
Yeah, that.
That was weak.
Talk to somebody.
What should be the first thing you do?
Talk to your leader.
Okay, thanks. All right, we have mission trip and camps coming up.
Yeah. Get into that before it's too late.
Yeah, what he said. Get into it before it's too late, bro. It's gonna be fun. I'm ready for
Helping
it.
you out of it.
Thanks. Thank you, I need it. All right, so today we're continuing our series on Legendary, and Brad is going to be telling us about Samson. Are we excited?
Yes. Yes.
I sense the excitement. All right. If we'll bow our heads and pray, I'd like to pray over Brad. Dear Lord, thank you so much for this day, and thank you so much for everything you've given us. And I thank you for giving us a place here to come together and to worship and to learn more about you, God. I pray that you just open up our hearts and our minds to listen to what you have to say. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thanks, Tori.
Yo, Brad!
Thank you. Your allowance will be given later. If you want to go there, the reason I don't give you allowance is because you don't do the chores.
Oh.
Since when they were little, we had this like chore charts. Have any parents ever use chore charts? It's like if you do this chore, it's worth this much. We tried all of those things. They didn't do anything. Like you'd offer them money and they'd be like, nah, I don't need that. Love you though. Cap? I can speak teenager, I just choose not to. When I worked in the inner city, I could speak that way too. I lost that over the years. It was fun. I used to work in the jail. It was a good time. That's what Michael and I have all kinds of things in common. We worked in law enforcement. Yeah. Probably soulmates. Sorry, Ashley. Yeah, I heard there was only one. Anyway, I'm sorry. I'm really discombobulated tonight. Like, you guys ever have one of those weeks where it's just like things just keep happening? Like, this has been a hard week for me. And I don't mean like the hard and like pray for me, my life sucks and my dog died, or sorry if your dog died. It's not that, but it's like, man, it's just been like so much. And I feel like I've been running for like the last week and I haven't taken a break. And like, if you remember last week, last time I spoke a couple weeks ago, I'm like, I got this binder and I got all my pages organized and I forgot to print my pages. And so I had to run to my dad's house, and the binder I'm using tonight was given to me by a coach 18 years ago. I found it in a bag under my bed, and you can see it's kind of taped together. So it's just one of those ways. Anyway, we're going to talk about Samson. Who knows anything about Samson? Anybody? He was strong. Yeah. Is that what we know about? He had long hair, beautiful dreads. He was like the Rapunzel of the Bible. Right? Okay. Anybody know anything? He was ugly?
Adam dressed up
maybe,
as Samson right here.
Ugly
You were
and
Samson.
mean sometimes.
Kyle asked if I was going to wear like a muscle suit tonight to speak, but interestingly, we don't even know if Samson was big. We just know he was strong. Like he could have been like Popeye, like a little dude with big forearm. I don't know. But anyway, so Samson is this famous character, and I called him up there. I'm a big like superhero fan. Like Spider-Man's my favorite, but all superheroes except I'm really like a hardcore Superman hater. So like, don't get me started. Like, he's like the do anything man. I have no weakness man except this rare rock that all the criminals have in abundance. It's just Superman stupid. But Samson is an anti-hero. Does anybody know what an anti-hero is?
Bad guy.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily, yes.
He's not necessarily a perfect character because he has faults, but usually he strives to do things in the best way possible.
That's how we define him now. That is. And if you didn't hear him, he said, like, he's not necessarily a good guy, but he tries to do good things. That's how we've modernized it a little bit, because we like Batman. We want to say Batman's an anti-hero. We want to say some of those guys. But if you go back 20 years, an anti-hero wasn't even that. It was like a guy who just ended up doing good things, but that wasn't necessarily what he set out to do. So like, they didn't even strive to necessarily do good. They just sort of like stumbled into doing good. And that's kind of where Samson is. So if we go to the chapter in Hebrews that Michael quoted a long time ago, which theoretically is this next slide, we see this, it says, and so it's already listed out like Abraham and some other people, and it says, how much more do I need to say? I would take too long to recount the stories of the faith of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah. It goes through all of these people, so Samson's, like right there. And if you skip a little bit, it said, by faith these people overthrew kingdoms, they ruled with justice and received what God had promised. They shut the mouth, I think there was like a weird thing, but they shut the mouths of lions, quenched the flames of fire, escaped death. That got kind of weird, twisted somehow. Weird computers, but you get it, they did like cool things. And so Samson is mentioned there. But if you know the story of Samson, I struggle to put Samson in the Faith Hall of Fame. And I think you'll see why, because he's kind of an anti-hero. He's not really a guy. And even tonight, like, I'm going to tell you more, like, if we look at Samson's life, what not to do, rather than like, hey, emulate Samson. He did cool things. No, he really didn't. But he made the list, so he's worth talking about it. He's a legendary character. Probably if you grew up in the church, you probably heard the story of Samson, and they like to emphasize like he was really strong and he pushed down a pillar, and he killed about 3,000 people when he did that. But we like to talk about that. But we have to set the stage for Samson's life. So Samson lived in a period of time called the Judges. Now, Judges is kind of a bad name for us English speakers, because Judges sounds like somebody that wears like a robe and gavels. That's not really what the Israelite judges did. They were usually military people. You could think of them more as like a general or a military ruler kind of guy. They did those types of things. You could say they were deliverers. They sort of like answered a call when Israel was in trouble, and they delivered Israel from whatever it was. So don't think judge as in a guy with a gavel deciding if something was legal or not. And so to understand this story, so Joshua, you guys all know, like Joshua led them into the promised land, and God said, kick out all the people that are there, make them not be there anymore, and then this land is yours. And so Joshua goes into the promised land, and he did this. I don't know if you know this, like they still study Joshua's conquest of the promised land in military academies around the world, because what he did was really cool in how he did it. But he kind of hopscotched around to the power centers that were there and used the Israelite army to destroy them. But then Joshua was like, okay, the big military action is over. So I'm going to disband the army, send you guys off to your inheritance, but you guys need to finish what we started, because God said, don't leave anybody around anymore. So all of the people that live here now are bad, and I mean really bad. They like sacrificed children, they did all kinds of terrible things. So it wasn't like they were just bad neighbors, they were like terrible. So God's like, so Joshua, when he disbands, he's like, okay, you guys go follow God. You have to do what God said. So, there's little pockets of Philistines and Midianites still in the promised land. And he's like, okay, so your tribe needs to take care of those guys and go do your thing. So what did they do?
They killed him.
They didn't. The Israelites just kind of dispersed, and they went out and just left those groups alone, which is not what they were supposed to do. And that brings me to my first point, see, there it is. It's working, Michael. Partial obedience is still disobedience. Because God said, go do this, and then Joshua echoed it. Okay, we got this. Now you guys go finish the job. And they didn't do it. And so what happens is, over the years, they left this group of Philistines alone, or this group of Midianites or Amorites or whatever. They left them alone, and those groups got powerful again. And then for 400 years is the story of Judges, 400 years. And it's this period of time between Joshua and the kings of Israel. And the whole story is just struggling with these pockets of people that they left behind. Partial obedience is still disobedience. if the Israelites had done what God commanded them to do, the book of Judges doesn't happen. Because those people wouldn't have been there to bother Israelites anymore. And I'm sure we've all gotten in trouble. I know like my boys will have the living room messed up, and I'll be like, you guys need to take these toys and put them upstairs. And they take them and set them on the stairs. And when we get home, we're like, dude, why didn't you take care of your stuff? And they're like, well, we put them on the stairs. Is that obedience? No, you were told to put them upstairs. That's like half a job. To quote bad sports cliches, good enough is neither good nor enough. I almost made that the point, but I decided to stay away from bad sports cliches. But you get the idea, right? So Israel would have not had this problem if they had just done what they were told. But they didn't, so now we're plagued with this. So we've got this time, and we're into Samson's story now. And to understand, too, the book of Judges, the last thing I'm going to say about it is it's not a concise whole Israel story. So it was like things happened to this group of Israelites or this group of Israelites or this. So it was more affecting a tribe or two rather than the whole Israelite nation. So when they talk about raising up an army, it's an army from a tribe, not the whole like 500,000 man Israelite army. Okay, so it's just little pockets. Samson's one of the last judges to come up. And all of the judges' stories, if you read it, every single story starts something like this. The Israelites turned away from God and did bad things. Bad people came and started oppressing the Israelites. The Israelites got sad and prayed to God, and God raised up a judge. Every single one of them. 12 judges. That's the beginning of every story. Samson's one of the last. So we can go on. So let's meet Samson. He was, I forgot now. I think he was a Benjamite. Anyway, doesn't really matter. So this is the birth of Samson. Again, the Israelites, there it is. That's what I told you guys, right? And the Philistines, those were the bad guys from David's time too. Later on, David waits to fight him. Anyway, in those days, a man named Manoah from the tribe of Dan, he was a Danite, lived in the town of Zorah. His wife was unable to become pregnant, and they had no children. Happens a lot in the Bible. The angel of the Lord, which was probably Jesus. Anytime you see the angel of the Lord, it's a very special angel, and probably Jesus, appeared to Manoah's wife and said, even though you have been unable to have children, you will soon become pregnant and give birth to a son. So be careful, you must not drink wine or any other alcoholic drink, nor eat any forbidden fruit. You will become pregnant and give birth to a son, and his hair must never be cut, for he will be dedicated to God as a Nazirite from birth. You will begin to rescue. Notice it doesn't say finish rescuing Israel. It just says begin to rescue Israel from the Philistines. So Samson was a rare thing. A Nazirite was someone who took a vow to be extra close to Jesus or to God. And it was like usually a time period that I'm going to dedicate myself to God above everything else for like a year. And so they would stay away from alcohol. So the Israelites had all these other rules. He still had those. So they had to stay away from alcohol. They had to avoid cutting their hair. And they couldn't touch anything dead. In some accounts, it actually says if someone died in their presence, it was a breach of the Nazirite vow. Like, it literally, like it was, you had to stay away from dead, unclean things. And so he had all the normal Israelite rules, plus those three. There were three people mentioned in the Bible that were lifetime Nazirites. Him, Samson, Samuel, who was the prophet through the period of Saul and David, and probably wrote the book of Judges. And the last one was John the Baptist, who most of you guys know who that is. So those were three lifetime Nazirites. But most of the time, it was supposed to be this short-lived thing. And you'll see as we get into the story, Samson's not a very good Nazirite. Like, not at all. So remember those three things that he's supposed to stay away from. Not cut his hair. That's the one most of it, you know. No alcohol. No dead things. Okay, so go ahead and go on. And anyway, so we skip the rest of chapter 13 is basically Samson's parents arguing over whether they're going to die because the angel visited them. Which seems kind of silly because, like, the angel just said, hey, you're going to have a baby. And then you go on and on, I think I'm going to die. It's like, he said you're going to have a baby. He didn't say you were going to die. But that's the rest of chapter 13. So we don't really meet Samson until chapter 14. And this is where we meet Samson. Samson went down to Timnah and saw there a young Philistine woman. When he returned, he said to his father and mother, I have seen a Philistine woman in Timnah. Now get her for me. Now, I think that's funny. Does no one else think that's weird? Like, this is like the savior of Israel right now. And he's like, I see woman, get her. Like, that's essentially like what he did. Now let's forget for a second, this is a Philistine woman. The Philistines were bad. They're like killing children, doing all these bad things. And Israelites don't like them. But we need to understand at this point, the Philistines in the Danite region had grown so powerful, they were basically in charge. The Israelites and were living with the Philistines, mixed all together, but they were oppressed by the Philistines because the Philistines were powerful and they were in charge. So Samson is not only wanting to quite literally marry the enemy, he just I saw a pretty girl, I want her, go get her. And this is, I think, when we see what may have been a cause of a problem for Samson, because his parents do it. And so you can go on. And my next point is this, and we need to understand this, and I know it's hard, so I'm not going to read the rest of you. Yeah, there it is. Good parents say no to their kids, at least sometimes. Right? Like there's some parents out in the room, and I hope you guys have good parents. I know some of you probably don't. Some of you come from weird homes, and I understand that. But most of you probably have decent parents. And most of you probably have been told no by your parents. You need to understand they're not doing that to ruin your life. At least not most of the time. Sometimes I say no to my kids because I want them to suffer. But, most parents don't do that. I'm not saying I'm a good parent. Normally, the good parents have a reason, right? They're trying to protect you. They're trying to teach you something. I'm always trying to teach my kids something. Ava was mad the other night, and we were having this discussion, and she got more mad at me because I was trying to, teach her in that moment, and I'm not so good. Sometimes girls just want to be angry and tell you about it. They don't want you to tell you, they don't want you to fix it for them. So if you ever get married, remember that. I do it wrong all the time. So anyway, but that's the idea. So good parents say no to kids. This guy was doing something terrible. Don't marry a Philistine. And also, you just saw this hot girl, and you're like, hey, I want her. That's not the way to meet a wife. But his parents were for just one verse, they're like, shouldn't you marry an Israelite? And he's like, no, I want her. And they're like, okay. So they go get her. And so remember that. Your parents are not necessarily evil. They're probably want what's best for you, and they're just doing their best too. So if we go on, and we get here, so they go get her, and this is important to the story. The Spirit of the Lord came powerfully on him. This happens every time Samson does something. So I want you to understand, Samson wasn't necessarily just this big, burly, strong man walking around. Every time he did a feat of strength, it says something like that. The Spirit of the Lord, that's the Holy Spirit, that's the thing that lives in us, came on him powerfully. So it's not like he just does stuff. God empowers him in a moment to do stuff. So he's more like the Hulk, he gets angry and then he gets strong, not that he's always strong. Make sense? So anyway, but what's he do? He kills a lion with his bare hands. That's, a lion. I don't know about you, but I would not want to fight a lion. He kills it with his bare hands. Let's skip for a second. Sometime later, when he goes back to marry her, so he meets her and says, hey, yeah, let's do this, comes back later. The lion's dead along the road, but they put some bees, made a honeycomb in it, and so what's he do? He eats the honey. Why is that important?
Because he touched the dead thing.
Can't be around dead stuff. Remember those 3 Nazarite vows? One down. Touch dead stuff. Not only did he kill it, which is debatable whether that breaks his vow, then he touches it after it's dead. So he's unclean. Number 1 gone. Okay, let's keep going. So he goes, so he's going to get married, right? And it says there was a 7-day feast or celebration. Most Jewish scholars would say that celebration is a big drinking party. Basically, it's 7 days of drunkenness. So what do you think Samson was doing at his 7 days of drinking party?
Drinking water.
Definitely just drinking water. Yeah, he's standing. No. He's drinking alcohol, right? So what was his second Nazarite vow? Don't drink alcohol. So we've just met Samson. He's already broke 2 of the 3 things that were supposed to set him apart. It's not so good. And so not only does that, so he sets this up. So he stands up. He says, I'm going to tell you guys a riddle. So all these Philistines around. I'm going to tell you guys a riddle. And if you get it right, then I'm going to give you 30 sets of clothes and some other stuff like that. And this is the riddle. Out of the eater, something to eat. Out of the strong, something sweet. Now, he's talking about the lion that he just got honey out of. But why would anybody know that? Literally nobody knows that happened to him. So, that's kind of dirty pool for a riddle. That's the unanswerable question. So he's like, hey, let's play this game, but you can't win. So what happens is, these guys are mad because they can't figure it out. They don't want to give him 30 sets of clothes or money and all that stuff. And so they start nagging his wife. And his wife starts nagging him. And he eventually gets tired of being nagged and tells her. What do you think she does? She tells them. And they respond with, what is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion? So he follows up Samson's response. They had this whole poetic moment. Samson's response, if you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have solved my riddle. Little humor there. But anyway, Samson's mad now, probably drunk and mad, and he goes off. Guess what he does? He now owes these guys 30 pieces of clothing. What do you think he does? He kills 30 other guys, takes their clothes off of them, touching dead bodies again, and then gives those guys the clothes. So, understand the Philistines were bad. God probably wanted them eliminated. Actually, we know God wanted them eliminated because he told Joshua to do it, right? And Joshua told the other Israelites. But I don't think murdering 30 people over a riddle is really what God intended when he made that rule. Did it accomplish some of it? Yeah. That's not really God's MO. When God orders people to be eliminated, they're supposed to just go do it. There's no spoils, there's nothing like that. And Samson's just like, I'm mad, so I'm going to kill those 30 guys, I'm going to give those guys himself. So anyway, he storms off then, leaves the scene for a while. His new wife doesn't know where he went. And most people think it was about 6 months before he comes back. So he comes back 6 months later, and yeah, there's the 30 thing. So if we go ahead. So he comes back. This is the next thing that happens. He comes back, and he goes to his father-in-law, and he's like, okay, where's my wife at? And he's like, dude, I thought you weren't coming back. So they married her off to somebody else. And that starts to make Samson mad, and the father-in-law is like, but wait, I got another daughter. You can have her. But Samson's mad, so what's he do?
Kills him.
Not yet, no. He actually doesn't. He doesn't. That's normally his thing, but not yet. So he goes off, he catches 300 foxes. I don't know how you catch 300 foxes. And he ties their tails together. This was like a head trip. How do you tie a fox? Anyway, so he ties them together, ties their tails to torches, and sends them to the Philistine fields. So they burn everything down, and all their crops are gone, and the Philistines are now angry. And so they find out who Samson is, and they go to his father-in-law, and they're mad, so they kill his father-in-law and his wife. Maybe his whole family, really don't know. There's lots of killing going on, and he does that. So Samson comes back, and since you've acted like this, I swear that I won't stop until So he comes back, he's mad that his father-in-law and his wife got killed, so his response is to slaughter a bunch of the people that are there. More, by the way, more murder and more dead people. And then now he's tired, and he runs off to a cave. And what happens, I don't remember what slide I had next, but this is what happens. So the Philistines raise up an army to go get Samson, about 1,000 men. And they go into Judah's territory where Samson's hiding out. And the Judah people are like, "Hey, what are you guys doing here?" And they're like, "We want Samson." And they're like, "Hold on, we'll get it for you." So the people of Judah raise an army of 3,000 people to go get Samson. And they take Samson, and Samson's like, "Fine, as long as you promise not to kill me, I'll go with you." So they take him back to this army of 1,000 Philistines. As soon as the Judah people let him go, Judah are Israelites as well, if you didn't know that, he grabs a jawbone of a donkey, another dead thing, and kills the entire army of 1,000 men. So you get this picture, there's just a lot of violence in the story, which has always surprised me that we tell little kids this story. We just leave out a lot of the stuff, right? We're just like, yeah, he got his hair cut and life was no, there's mass murder, massive killings, beating to death with donkey jawbones, crazy stuff like that. So he kills these 1,000 people, and this is kind of the end of this bit of the story. Because after this, now Samson's a single man, and what do lonely single men do? Oh, sorry, I forgot this. Sorry, my bad. This is part of my discombobulated. This is when I told you it was one of those days. Violence begets violence. What does that mean?
It's violent.
What's that?
It's violent.
Okay, yeah. I like what you said, but let's expand. What does violence begets violence? This is actually a piece of a famous quote from a famous dead guy that I'd really like to have coffee with. I have a list of dead people that I'd love to have coffee with. I mean, if they weren't dead, it makes it hard. I don't like want a coffee with the dead body. So, anyway. What? Violence brings more violence. That's exactly what it means. If that's what you said, I'm not sure, but I played guitar for too long, I can't hear very well. But anyway, violence begets violence means violence brings about more violence. And that's what we really see for a lot of this story. He does something to them, they do something to him. He does something to them, they do something back. And if you notice, it keeps escalating. It gets worse. Now, God's plan was for the Philistines to be eliminated. But I still go back to the fact, I don't think this crazy, violent cycle of craziness is really what God wanted. Like, maybe the result of what God wanted, but probably not the means that God wanted it to happen in. And this is actually a quote. Anybody want to guess who the quote's from? Anybody? Adults, maybe? Martin Luther King Jr. I've actually got the quote here somewhere. So let me read it. It's actually really good. He was a smart dude. He said this: violence begets violence, hate begets hate, and toughness begets a greater toughness. It is all descending spiral, and the end is destruction for everybody. And again, Philistines were supposed to be gone, but I don't think that this is what God really, not the means that God wanted it to happen in. So, now we can keep going with the story. So, Samson now, he's a lonely guy. What do lonely guys that seem to behave badly do a lot? He goes and finds a prostitute. And he's sleeping with a prostitute, and the Philistines, who are still mad about the whole fox thing, and the whole 1,000 men getting killed and all that stuff, they are going to lay in wait for Samson. So they're laying in the city gate area, and they're going to, in the morning, with the gates open, we're going to kill him. So Samson, at some point in the middle of the night, for some reason, wakes up. The gates are barred. They don't let people out of the city in the middle of the night, but, Samson wants to leave. And so what does Samson do when he wants to leave? He leaves. So it says in the Bible that he got up, took hold of the doors of the city gate. So this is the gate of the city. He rips it off, including the posts, carries bar and all, and that's bar that they set across, lifted them to his shoulders, and carried them to the top of the hill that faces Hebron. So think like small castle gate. Scholars estimate that all of that stuff would have weighed as much as 8,000 pounds, 4 tons. Superhero fans like me would, of course, know that Captain America can lift about 2,500 pounds. So he's stronger than Cap. And he carries it, and you should also know that this hill that faces Hebron is 37 miles away and uphill, 3,000 feet. So he throws these up to 8,000 pound things on his shoulder, and he walks up to the top of a hill 37 miles away and drops them like a boss. That's impressive. He didn't kill anybody there, so we can kind of applaud that. That's a big deal. So anyway, that's kind of his last feat of strength, because the next thing, it starts to go south. What's the lady everybody knows in Samson's story? Delilah. He's about to meet Delilah. So it says, sometime later, he fell in love with the woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. Now, contrary to popular stories, we don't know that she was a prostitute, that we normally say that she was. It was actually a Jewish scholar centuries later, not connected to the Bible, that said she was. So we don't know. The Bible doesn't say if she was. He was just with a prostitute, so it's believable that she was. But so anyway, the Delilah story, and I got to wrap this up fast. So the Delilah story we all know, right? So basically the Philistines say, we'll give you a bunch of money if you turn him in, right? And so they're talking, and he says, if you use fresh cords, and then she's like, how do I beat you? How do we kill you, And he's like, fresh cords, wrap them up around me, I can't get out. And she's like, does it? And then she's like, Samson, the Philistines are on you, and he breaks loose. And then she whines to him like, I'm sorry, why do you not love me? Why do you not? And I know I'm not trying to profess my love to you. Anyway, so she does that, and then the next time it's like ropes. And then same thing happens. He breaks loose, and then she's like, why did you lie to me? And then it happens again, and this time he's like, if you braid my hair in a certain way and you put a pin in it, then it'll work. And then the whole thing happens again. Guys, if you're in a relationship and the person keeps trying to figure out how to kill you, it's probably not a great relationship. But we all know this story, right? What happens next? cut my hair, right? Now, you can go on, I don't remember what slide I had, but bad company corrupts good character. You can't associate, I said this in our small group tonight, your inner circle of people, the people that you're romantically involved with, they have to have the same values of you. They have to. Otherwise, you get drawn their direction. And we see that with Samson. He associates himself with Delilah. If you go back to his Philistine wife, she was the reason she nagged him until he said his silly riddle. But like Delilah keeps doing this. That's a toxic relationship, right? It's terrible. And yet it keeps going that way. And Samson eventually gives in and says, well, cut my hair. And so guys, you got to evaluate your life. And if you're a friend to someone who's in a toxic relationship, good friends tell their friends when they're screwing up. I have a former student that I'm close to, great kid, and she wouldn't say that it was her fault. She got pregnant in high school. And she had been like a really good kid, she would say. But she started dating this guy and she knew he was bad for her. But she dated him anyway. And then pretty soon she stopped doing good things. And pretty soon they started doing bad things and she's pregnant. And she loves her son. I mean, the story has sort of ended well. But it's definitely not the plan. And she told me one time, she said, it's like I was up on a chair and he was down on the ground and I was trying to pull him up. But it's much easier to pull someone off of a chair than up onto it. And that's just always stuck with me. But that's it. Our inner circle has to be people with our same value. If you're going to hear anything tonight, that's probably the biggest point I have for you. But we'll get through this and wrap up the rest of the story. So, this last time, and I want you to know, Samson didn't have magic hair. And if you read this, he tells her about his hair. And he knows his hair is important. Why? Because it's his last vow. Remember, there were 3 vows. Dead things, alcohol, hair. He's broken the other ones a couple of times. The hair is the only one that's left. So he knew it was a big deal, but we see, he's told her, because we know the outside of the story, and we'll probably look at the story. Why would you tell her that? Because he didn't know. He didn't know that the Lord had left him. See, I think Samson had gotten so full of himself and so arrogant that he forgot where his power came from. That was why, because he's surprised when it goes away. So don't forget where your power comes from. He broke all of his Nazirite vows. He broke everything that God had said separate about him. And then he lost his power. But we get this interesting verse. Sometimes God gives us to ourselves. If we want something, eventually God lets us have it, even if it's not what we want. God's like that parent that's eventually like, I've tried to protect you. I've tried to tell you what to do, but you're not listening. So you know what? You can try it your own way. And I think that's exactly what happened here. But God's like, you know what? I'm done. I've tried. I'll be nearby if you need me, but you can try to do this on your own. And that's what happened. They gouge out his eyes. They make him do woman's job. And it's got this interesting thing. It says, but the hair on his head began to grow. But let's go back. Not magic hair. I think this is Samson. So he's blinded. He's weakened. And he's doing women's work. That's what they made him do. I think he's humbled. I think his hair, of course, even my hair starts to grow eventually. But his hair starts to grow. I think this is a metaphor to some extent for him. He's been humbled. He knows he's not special anymore. So let's go. And so this is the end of the story, right? He's brought in to entertain people, and he's blinded, and he says, set me next to these pillars. And then he prays to God and says, empower me one more time. And he pushes the pillars apart and killed 3,000 Philistines in that day. That was more than he had killed in his entire life. Now, just to wrap this up, I want to look at this last thing Samson said. Sovereign Lord, remember me. Please, God, strengthen me just once more time. He's remembered who empowered him. Let me with one blow get revenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. I so wish he didn't say that. Because he didn't pray like, God, let me do what you put me here for. He's like, let me get revenge. Now, I don't know his heart. I don't know where he ended up. I'd love to meet him in heaven someday. I don't know how this was supposed to go. But that line bothers me. Because is this Samson just recognizing God's power, or is this Samson returning back to who Samson was? And I wish I knew that. But unfortunately with this story, we don't get a nice bow tie on the end. We don't know it. And so let's get to that last point, wherever it is. God's way isn't always easy. I would never tell you that the Christian faith is easy. But I will say your way is always hard. Samson's life was supposed to be to start delivering the Israelites from the Philistines. And he did that. This was the beginning of the end for the Philistines, because Saul came along not too much longer, and then David came after that. So he did do that. But I have got to imagine that if Samson had been dedicated to the Lord from the beginning with all the gifts and powers that he had, it would have gone much different. And I think my biggest indicator of that is this. There were 12 judges in Israel. Samson was the only one killed in violence. Every other judge died of old age. God's plan happens with or without you. That's what Cassie said last week. And in this case, God's plan happened with Samson. But I don't think it happened the way God wanted it to happen. Because God gives us to ourselves. He lets us do what we want. So guys, as you go out of here, I want you to think about those things. There's an easy way. There's a hard way sometimes in life, but there's always a harder way. God's way is the better way. It always is. You guys know, most of you raised in church, you know what's right and wrong. You know what your parents want. You know all these things about toxic relationships. So I implore you to do it. So Samson's life, more than anything else, is a cautionary tale, I think, for us. It tells us what we shouldn't do. It tells us how we should live. And what we see, and the saddest part about it, we see a great power that just didn't quite get it right. So let's not be like that. So anyway, sorry I kept you a little long. I apologize. But anyway, let's get out of here. We'll pray and go. Heavenly Father, thank you for the people that made it here tonight. God, I just praise you for the time that's set apart. I talked about right moves, and I'm glad that they recognize that this was the right move to be here tonight, Lord. And I thank you for that. Lord, please guide us as we go. Help us to make those good decisions, and help us to recognize the path that you have for us, and help us to follow